Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage.
Howdy and welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. Today, as usual, we'll be talking about what we've been listening to recently, hit a community question, and talk about this week in music. Our feature this week is something that I'm really excited to dive into because it's definitely something that I'm not incredibly familiar or knowledgeable about. And Liam is going to school me on some things, school all of us on some things, hopefully. And I'm excited to delve into it, but we are hitting the 25th anniversary of OutKast's ATLiens. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to dive into the whole Atlanta scene, the Atlanta hip hop scene, and everything that has come out of that. And I think I'll hopefully have a new, not that I don't already have a massive amount of respect and wonder about the whole thing. It's just, it's a territory that I would love to dive a little bit more into. And so I'm definitely excited to do this episode. So thanks for offering up the idea.
Yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to get you listening to a little goodie mob, I think, by the end of all this.
Sweet. So I really am excited to hear about a lot of these things that I know almost nothing about. There's some things that I know about, and we'll hit off of some of that. But what have you been listening to this week? Did you buy anything cool? Did you hit up Record Store Day yesterday? What's going on with all that?
Yeah, so it was Drop 2. We've said that they've spaced this out because of COVID. I also feel like it's going to kind of stay this way. But it's cool. They spread it out. They get the impact. I'll say that I did the same thing this time, went in the afternoon, wasn't expecting to find that Foo Fighters vinyl that we talked about. Didn't find the Foo Fighters vinyl that we talked about. It's going for $130 on eBay currently. It's crazy. So it's fine. Like, you can listen to it, you can stream it. And if it, they're also the kind of band that could repress it in purple vinyl in a couple weeks or something like that. Who knows? So I'm not too stressed about that. The interesting thing is the main reason that I went to the record store was actually to get John Mayer's new album, which I admittedly haven't bought a John Mayer album since Continuum, which is 2003 or 4, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I liked his earlier music. Heavier Things, which was his second album, was my album. I feel like I appreciated him. I mean, he's a fantastic guitarist, obviously. Appreciated him as a songwriter when it seemed more genuine and it seemed like he actually had things to be singing about. And then he became a massive star, and he has dated everyone in Hollywood, and he's mega. And so anytime I heard something else from him, it just felt like I couldn't bond with it. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes. As I mentioned the last time, like, the aesthetic of this could be a turnoff. I could get it. It's like a very kind of 80s Rick Springfield feeling vibe. He's got a song on there called Why You No Love Me, which feels like it could be like it's like an Eagles knockoff kind of vibe. I should hate it. I don't. It's really fun. If you go, it's a John Mayer album. Like, you're going to listen to it, and it's not anything. It's not a departure, but the production's really good. There's a lot of synth, and you have your kind of Kokomo, steel drum things here or there. He's kind of delved enough into that time capsule where it's corny in a loving way, and I appreciate it. So that was one that I wanted. But anyway, I went in. I was open to buying it on CD or vinyl. I wasn't sold on either way. Couldn't get it on CD because I think it seems like everybody picked it up. That's one thing about Record Store Day that is pretty great is you get that boost of foot traffic. Yeah. And so I think, again, this rolling things out also helps the labels and the production companies to kind of parse out, all right, if I put out an album and it's during one of the Record Store Day drops, I'm probably going to move some records. I'm actually going to sell some physical product because people are going to be in the store and they'll scoop it up alongside their, Bob Dylan reissues or whatever. So I got like the second to last copy of this new John Mayer album, which was very weird. Yeah, it was very weird. I had kind of pre-ordered a Donkey Kong Country original soundtrack kind of cover recreation vinyl a few months back. Finally came.
This can take a while.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, we've talked a little in the Discord about how great David Wise is. Fantastic. Like that. Yeah, all the music that he made. But it did make me actually kind of go back a little bit. So David Wise, just to go off on like a slight video game tangent here for those folks listening.
Acceptable, yeah.
So I didn't realize how much of his Nintendo, like NES scoring was in my rotation until I had gone back a little while ago. I had so many games, and he was with Rare, so he was hand in hand with Rare. So Rare churned out games for the NES. But Battletoads, Iron Sword. I had this I was digging in the bargain bin. I was trying to grab games whenever I could.
Absolutely.
So I had the Beetlejuice, the video game. Nice. Captain Skyhawk was this like flying shooter kind of game. Solar Jetman. Like I had all
Solar
these
Jetman
games.
is great.
But he did all of them. And so I had gone back a little while ago and kind of revisited some of those NES jams, and they're really great. And so now I'm kind of hoping that somebody, just like they lovingly recreated this Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, there have been great bands that have covered classic NES songs, and every so often you find like a really good version of Bubble Bobble or something.
Yeah.
And I'm now I need to start hunting to see if anybody's kind of done a Wise dive, like done any really cool like covers of his music at all.
That's something that, I was really into kind of when that first started to gain popularity on the internet, bands like the Mini Bosses and the Advantage and those types of artists. And it's cool that that's kind of segued into this kind of what we have now, where people are literally putting out their own versions of the entire game soundtrack.
Yeah.
And I think that all kind of started with those bands that just were crazy enough to sit down and figure out these ridiculously complex songs note for note and translate them into, a rock band environment. And now we've got people, just doing jazz versions of game soundtracks and chill out down tempo versions of game soundtracks. So I'm here for it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean they don't exist anywhere. That's part of it. Is just like ROMs and stuff. People are going to find ways to tap back into things that they love, and they want them on demand. They want them accessible, and that music, for the most part, you can't really stream anywhere. You can't find it. You have to import a CD that came out 20 years ago to get some of these songs. So
or play it off of YouTube, which sounds
terrible. Exactly. I mean, YouTube. That's everybody just goes to YouTube for it. So then a couple other things. I've been trying to school myself a little bit more. I want to say in the past 6 or 7 months, I've been listening to a lot of Motown, Stevie and Ohio players. And so I picked up some been grabbing records as I find them. I picked up an Earth, Wind, and Fire album, which they weren't on Motown. Right. I think they were on Columbia, but that same funk vibe, that disco funk. I mean, every song is just a jam. I don't know most of the songs on this album. I picked up I Am, but they're one of those bands where I think you can they have such a great catalog, and you can just scoop up anything by them and throw it on, and you're going to have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I grabbed that, and we've kind of been dancing around to it. My daughter's really into gymnastics right now, so she has us all like exercising in the house. So I threw that on, and it was really
fantastic. Cool. Get your
and then the last things I got. I'm always on the hunt for Bob James albums. Just every so often, I'll scan through. I don't know how familiar you are with him, but
not too much.
So, do you ever watch the show Taxi?
I did quite a bit.
Yeah. So it was his song was the opening song for Taxi, and that was like an existing song. I'm blanking on the name. It's a woman's name. I'm looking it up right now. And Angela. So it's Angela. Mm-hmm. Existing Bob James song that they just used for the beginning of that, and I always just liked that vibe. I grew up watching that. My parents loved that show.
Yeah.
And that kind of smooth jazz, whatever you want, that like kind of Rhodes sounding. Smooth sound. I always dug
the muted trumpets.
Exactly. But I could always like, he's just such a great key player. Anything that I get from him he's another artist that I just grab whatever I can. So yeah, I don't even know. I mean, he's got such a catalog. He's got dozens of albums. I've got maybe 7 or 8 at this point.
Oh, wow.
So I picked up 2. But one thing that I kind of wanted to hit on real quick with him is we're going to be talking about hip hop later.
Yeah.
And he's one of those artists that, especially on the earlier LPs, when he was putting them out in like the late 70s into the early 80s, the origins of hip hop were in New York specifically, like people going diving for these records that had long, funky instrumental portions that they could then like put on and cut to over and over again so that they could rap over it or have somebody rap over it. And so Bob James is actually one of those artists who, when you go into like the samples, like the who sampled lists or whatever, his name is going to come up constantly because it's primarily instrumental music. And so he had, for example, he did a cover, I want to say on his like second or third album, of Paul Simon's Take Me to the Mardi Gras. Mm-hmm. And that cut alone is on Hold It Now, Hit It by the Beastie Boys, Straight Outta Compton by NWA,
oh my goodness,
Peter Piper by Run DMC. I mean, like Jay-Z, Heavy D, like all of these dudes sample this song and sample Bob James. And I get it. Like, again, like it was an easy thing to throw on, and it had a funky vibe to it, and you could style over it. And I like just putting it on and kind of chilling out and kicking it to it. I'm not freestyling over here.
Right.
But I definitely recommend, you just throw on any Bob James. You really can't go wrong.
All right. Definitely something I need to dig in. I love going down the sample rabbit hole and seeing, where these original tracks came from and how many times they were sampled. And sometimes you end up with situations where it's a sample of a sample and it just kind of perpetuates. So I always love digging down those types of rabbit holes.
Yeah, I think Billy Squier is another one. Like he has said that like most of his retirement and like most of his like later years has just been funded by the fact that that he just the stroke is just always sampled in everything all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a great song.
Get those royalty checks. Yeah. Absolutely.
What about you?
Well, I've still been listening to this Morcheeba album. I usually kind of digest something, and then there's so much out there that I move on to something else. But that has been very constant over these last 2 or 3 weeks. So I actually ended up ordering the limited edition vinyl because if I'm going to listen to something that much and I'm enjoying it and it's becoming more enjoyable over time rather than, you know, kind of petering out in my interest, I'll usually either add it to my wish list. But I just went ahead and ordered it. It's just so good, and I wanted to support them. It's just such a great album. I'm really impressed by it. It's the kind of thing where I was reading up a little bit on it, and they were saying how due to COVID they couldn't tour, so they were able to take the time during lockdown essentially to perfect the songs and just make them the best they possibly could be. And it really, really shows. The whole album is fantastic. Also purchased Some Cities by Doves, and talked about them a little bit on previous episodes, but this purchase completes my little trilogy of their first 3 albums that they re-released within these last couple of years.
That always feels good.
Yeah, they're just phenomenal albums. They have a couple other albums, just in my opinion, they're still great, but not quite up to the level of those first 3. And they just exist as a trilogy in my mind. So I'm happy to kind of complete that trilogy and have all of that. What else did I grab? Oh, just kind of on a whim, I popped in to Breakaway and I picked up Dire Straits.
Nice.
Brothers in Arms. That was one of the albums that I was missing. So I've got 4 of their albums now. And then I picked up Relayer by Yes, which is not the best Yes album, but it's one of those where the entire side A is like one 20-minute song.
Yeah.
So I'm a big prog rock fan, so I'm always into that.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with anything from Yes then. John Anderson's the man.
Absolutely.
Money for Nothing is on Brothers in Arms, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one with Money for Nothing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it's actually not my favorite album of theirs. Their first is still my favorite, but I want to complete the discography because I'm a big fan of theirs. Yeah, I kind of got, I've been into Yes for probably 20 plus years now, but John Anderson actually has a feature on the most recent Battles album.
Oh, and really?
So,
wow.
Yeah, that kind of reintroduced or rekindled my interest in Yes, and going back through their catalog, and, you know, in my mind, nothing beats Fragile, but I sat in the car and listened to that entire side A of Relayer, that whole one entire long song. And it was definitely a journey. I mean, it's so much fun. So I'm happy to have it. But that's about it for me. I'm going to move on to a little community question action, and then we'll wrap it up with some weekly topics.
Yeah, so Dan kind of brought something up in the Discord, and of course, if you're listening, you know, Retro Logic's got a great Discord. We're all hanging out in there and tossing stuff around.
Yeah,
a lot of video game talk, but some great music talk and nostalgia. We just had someone do an entire month-long run on Jurassic Park memorabilia.
Jurassic June was fantastic.
Jurassic June was awesome. It was so good. Great soundtrack, by the way. And so Dan brought something up, and I think it was that his wife was not. He discovered that she was not a Carole King fan. I think he was walking around the house singing a song, and she was like, "Ugh, why are you singing that Fabric Store music?"
Fabric Store music. That
killed me.
I was actually digging back through the Discord channel to see if I could find that, and you remembered it. So thank you.
Fabric Store music. It's so what you hear in Joanne's, man. It is the Hobby Lobby. It is what it is, man. Michael's music.
So if I ever open up a record store, I'm going to have a section called Fabric Store music.
Yeah, it's fantastic. No, it was the perfect thing. Props to her. That was a cut, man.
Amazing.
But it made me think a little bit about that the music that maybe you you either hate love or have some kind of connotation to, because Carole King, like legendary songwriter. I mean, incredible. The musical on Broadway, I haven't seen. I heard is fantastic, but like fully justified. I mean, she's incredible, but things get placed in their compartments and people get exposed to things the way that they do. Right. And so it's very easy to kind of have an association with something that meant something different at the time. And then for you, it is Joanne's music, you know? And so I was wondering if you had anything that you have that kind of association with at all.
That was such an interesting question. If there's something that to me has kind of been burnt out, and again, this is only in my mind. I used to really be into a lot of electronic music, specifically what would be called EDM now. But like in the 90s and early 90s and early 2000s, I was listening to a lot of it. I was a huge fan. And that seems to have really tapered off in quality over the last 10 years or so. And again,
as popularity skyrocketed, right?
Yeah. And this, I'm sure somebody in the Discord is going to school me on some really dope modern EDM music, and I'll say I stand corrected. But at least right now, my opinion is that it's just really, it's just not something that I'm into right now. Even stuff that I did try to get into for a while that is really cool, stuff like synthwave. Yeah. But I'm just really not interested in listening to any EDM or like what used to be called electronica. That's just me though. And again, I guarantee you someone is going to say like, well, hey, have you listened to this? This just came out last year or whatever. And once in a while, the Chemical Brothers will put out something cool. Even recently they've put out some good stuff, but yeah, it's just in my brain, it's so played out, and maybe I just listened to too much of it earlier on in my life that now it's just like, or maybe I'm just getting older and I don't want to hear all of the crazy, because it's gotten crazier with the insane, like the whole point now is to build up this insane amount of like anxiety ridden
and then
level
drop.
Of exactly. And so I'm just not into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's also about the light shows and the experience and the drug use. It's about dressing up crazy and spinning around in the desert with 20,000 other people and having a moment. Yeah,
and that's great. I fully support everybody that's into that. Enjoy yourself, enjoy your life. It's not something that I'm into anymore. Right. So for me, that's my Fabric Store music.
Yeah. I mean, I could feel that a little bit. When I thought about this, I thought about music that I was burned on, not from shopping at a store, but from working. I worked in a restaurant in Manhattan for a while when I was in school. And it was, I had 10 tables and it was kind of like alt cool Indian food, gluten-free, the whole thing. And I don't know if you're familiar with Buddha Bar. Buddha Bar was a series of compilations. It's a restaurant and a hotel. I think it's in like France or something, but curated this whole thing. So they played a lot of that. It was very like chill, vibey kind of electronic music from the early 2000s. But then like there was this, these two waiters and they would get control of the playlist and play the same things over and over again. And so it was Pete Yorn's, the first album, Music from the Morning After. So like if I hear Closet or any of the songs off of that, I Life on a Chain, I mean, it's all just, I smell the risotto. Gavin DeGraw's I Don't Want to Be. There's a lot of Dave Matthews. Like Dave Matthews' solo album is actually pretty good. I'm not a huge Dave fan, but there was some songs on there that it was just this playlist, man. It was like Les Nubians, who are really cool, but when I hear that kind of sound, it just takes me back to like
right. It's a personal experience
grinding. Yeah, exactly. And like it puts me off of all of that. And it's funny because Pete Yorn's music came up on the radio not too long ago, and again it took me back. It was actually like in a nice way. Like when I heard it, I was like, oh man, yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And then as I listened to it, I was like, oh my God, I heard this song 200 times like over the course of a summer, and I just wanted to die.
You can reach a lifetime maximum on hearing a single song.
Yeah. But it is unfair, right? It is unfair to like not naturally give some of this music a shake because it has that connotation. And so it's probably worth trying to like absolve yourself of whatever you've put on some of these artists and listen to it as best you can. But on the other side of it, nostalgia, I mean, we've touched on this before. We're going to touch on it again. Like nostalgia is so heavy in how you engage with art across the board, music, TV, video games, whatever it is, that it can cloud things a little bit, and it's almost impossible to take those goggles off. So if you don't like Carole King, you don't like Carole King. There's nothing I can do about it for you. It's fine.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, even
100%. Yeah, exactly. So let's dive into some of the stuff that happened in music history. Got a couple of news pieces that might be worth touching on here.
Do you want to hit the news?
Yeah, so I don't know if we've got heavy metal listeners at all, but it's actually the 50th anniversary of Judas Priest. There's a big box set coming out. They're really cool. I know the hits. I've never really gone too deep. I got a buddy who's a diehard. I think Rob Halford is rad. Yeah. But it's kind of crazy to think like 50 years of heavy metal is pretty nuts. And then
everyone knows that one person that is really into either Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or both.
And Iron Maiden's got new music coming out too. So it's a good time if you're into that. And Alice Cooper's out on the road. I mean, like if you're in that lane, man, you're having a good summer.
Definitely.
I don't know. I'm not good on social media stuff as much. I know the Versus series has been pretty popular, where they'll have two kind of musical icons hop on together and trade hits, or like they'll spin records that they worked on and tell stories and kind of see if they can one up one another. And actually, Babyface was one of the first ones, and we're going to talk about Babyface on side B a little bit, and it's really cool. I mean, that guy, holy crow, did that guy have a ton of hits. But so the Isley Brothers are back in the Billboard charts, new song, but they were on this Versus series 2 or 3 months ago and talked about their new music. And so it just kind of goes to show you the impact. I mean, we think about, again, I tried TikTok. My wife is really into it. You know, she's sitting there for an hour, just lost in it.
Oh man, is that where this is?
No, it's on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
But it might as well, right? But it goes to show you the impact that it has. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing in the industry as a whole, it's crazy. There's it's again, just as Spotify and all the other kind of streaming platforms, like on-demand streaming platforms, democratized music. TikTok and some of these other outlets are also doing that again, to the extent that now labels have to pay attention to it and are reacting instead. They can't even be proactive because it's really hard to market to these people. So what you have happening is kids, like, you know, a couple of tastemakers post a song that's from like 4 or 5 years ago, some obscure pop song, and it gets in everybody's head and it trends on TikTok. You have millions of people engaging with this song that was like an album cut from 4 years ago from these random pop stars, and all of a sudden it's blowing up. You have artists that are now making more new music that had stopped for a while because their songs from a few years ago are now suddenly trending on
so
TikTok.
They're trying
it's
to ride
so
that wave.
Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like they're almost like they had nothing to do with it. It was just a handful of kids. It's honestly like viral to the max. It's every day there's new things going viral. So anyway, so these guys did something on Versus a few months back. New song that's in the Billboard charts. Their first one, awesome. Everybody knows from any wedding you've ever been to. You know, You Make Me Want to Shout, right?
Yep.
That was 1959, dude.
Insane.
That's crazy. That is spanning 8 decades. That is 70 years. No, 62 years. Sorry. Let me do math. 62 years in between. But from the 50s to the 2021s. Yeah. 2020s. For a group like that. Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to point out, obviously, some awful news. Biz Markie dead at 57.
Oh, broke my heart.
Awful. Again, we're going to touch on some sort of alt hip hop on side B, but this man, I mean, you know, member of the legendary Juice Crew, Marley Marl, Big Daddy Kane, Roxanne Shante, Cool G Rap. But he was the man. I mean, like, he would pop up in the most random spaces. Everybody kind of cited him as this like fun, positive energy in that world that, you know, it was a tight-knit community, but it also could get very competitive and contentious.
Oh, yeah.
And he just brightened everybody up, and the amount of respect and outpouring, I mean, you can see it, obviously now. Again, social media just blows up, and it gives a really cool voice to everybody that you love in these situations. And so you see the Beastie Boys and Q-Tip and everybody kind of coming out and talking about how important this guy was. So
yeah, you could
props
probably
to you, Biz Markie.
Yes, rest in peace. And honestly, you could probably call him one of, if not the first, kind of alternative hip hop artists. Just kind of had his own flow and did his own thing, and you know, it resonated with a lot of people. Yeah, I think a lot of people know Biz Markie whether they know it or not.
I mean, he would pop up in weird spots. I remember watching, I think it was the second Men in Black movie, and there's a moment where they're like in a post office and they're discovering that everybody's an alien, and like he just starts beatboxing. Like, he's in there and he's beatboxing and talking to the aliens, but as Biz Markie. It was so weird. Yeah, it's such a bizarre moment.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
I miss weird stuff like that.
Yeah. Let's hit a couple things in music history here.
Yeah.
So it's summertime, and summertime means music festivals. And, you know, one of the first to really do it in a more alt space, a consistent space, was Lollapalooza.
Yes.
Today we're recording this. It's July 18th. 30 years ago was the first Lollapalooza.
Man, that makes
it was
me
actually,
feel old.
Yeah, right. It was actually a tour for a while, and then it became sort of a destination institution after kind of being remade years later. But yeah, Jane's Addiction, Nine Inch Nails, Ice-T, Butthole Surfers, Violent Femmes, Living Color. I mean, it was one of those things that you know, we've talked about that kind of cost versus what you're getting, and you just go there for the experience and get to see, you know, 10 bands that maybe you love half of them, but even that, your ticket wasn't that expensive, and you got a whole day out of it.
And I feel like that was one of the first festivals in the US to really just cover a broad spectrum of genres, because it's more of a US thing, but the festivals and you know, big multi-headliner tours in the US seem to be very genre focused. You know, whether it's a metal tour, you know, you've got Ozfest, and you've got, you know, you've got EDM festivals, but in Europe, it seems to be a lot more, hey, here's a music festival. We're covering the entire spectrum of genres here. And Lollapalooza really did try to do that.
Yeah.
Because even from the very first, year, you've got alternative, you've got heavy metal, you've got rap, you've got kind of a little bit of everything. And I think that was really good and open up. And surely that was on purpose. And Perry Farrell, I'm sure, had this whole thing orchestrated in his mind, but it kind of paved the way for those kinds of festivals that are becoming more and more common now in the States. Yeah.
Yeah. And you think about like Primavera over in Europe. I think that's in Spain or Portugal. But the lineup for that, I just love looking at that every year, and it's just so well curated. I think that's what you're saying, right? It's just like those festivals, it's like whoever is putting that together, like you trust the brand or you trust the music direction to just say like, I'm going to go there and I know that I'm just going to see good stuff. And whether I know all the bands or not, like it's just going to be it's a positive experience. Yeah. And it's going to be things that are worth seeing. Exactly. And yeah, Lollapalooza did that. I will say that I think, again, going back to how music is engaged with now, since like maybe 2017, 2016, music festivals have had to kind of revert back to that. And so they are getting more kind of divergent and diverse in their lineups. Some of them are doing it and kind of they're not cohesive at all, and so it's just a scatter shot. And you look at that lineup and you're like, you look at the lineup and you're like, who is going to see Miley Cyrus and Earth, Wind and Fire and whatever, and like Blink-182 and like they all seem like they could be really cool, but who is the demographic here? But there are some that do it really well. I've been to Bonnaroo a few times. It's not my favorite festival to be at. It's muddy and stinky, but like they do curate that really well. When you look at that lineup, it can be all over the place, but it's usually pretty solid. And the Lollapalooza lineup this year is pretty cool. I mean, it's Foo Fighters and Journey, and then you've got Post Malone and Tyler, the Creator. And it's like, you can see, obviously this year they have less to work with because there's only so many bands and artists that can actually get out there and do things right now. But you can see that there are there's a movement towards that, if you want to say Euro curation model of a festival, where it's like we need to be representative of the fact that people have very diverse listening habits these days. And that's what they want. They don't want to go there and see, look, Rock on the Range and all of those, like I think there's a Carolina something or other, like those things still exist where it's just butt rock, wall to wall butt rock. Like that's always going to exist. It's always going to be butt rock fest. But like the smart music festivals are trying to break from that a little bit, because that's where they see their listener base going, and it's pretty great. And then 2 years later, and I miss this Rage Against the Machine. Like I just want them back, man. And it bums me out whenever I talk about them, because I feel like if ever we needed Rage Against the Machine, it was in the past 6 years, since if you guys couldn't figure it out then what are you really doing? And you had Prophets of Rage, which was really cool. It was cool. Chuck D and those guys, and Be Real and Tom Morello. It's like it was Rage Against the Machine with Chuck D and Be Real. Like that was really cool. Yes. Not the same thing. Like definitely not the same thing. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm missing here. Rage Against the Machine goes is protesting music censorship. They go on the stage completely nude except for duct tape over their mouths and won't play any music. They just stand there for 25 minutes. 25 minutes? 25 minutes. Like I knew they did that. I didn't know it was 25 minutes. But you also, you remember I think it was at one of the VMAs that one of the band members climbed up on the back thing and just stayed up there for half an hour. He got up on the set on stage. Statue of Liberty, I think it was, or something. Up. I remember that. Yeah, it was crazy, dude. So I really do miss that. Kind of upset if I was a Rage Against the Machine fan and I waited, all day in the hot sun to see Rage Against the Machine, and all they do is come out
in their birthday suits
Yeah.
and not play any music, I'd be a little bit pissed off.
I'd be bummed too. Yeah, I'd totally be bummed too.
Like at least do that, but then like play some music afterwards or something.
Yeah. I may have touched on this in past episodes, so apologies, but I remember seeing Liam Gallagher at Lollapalooza and anticipating a disaster, because as much as I love Oasis and Liam's solo stuff, he's a disaster. Like, you follow him on Twitter and he's a disaster. And he was on stage. He may have gotten through 6 songs and just walked off. Like, he legitimately just walked off stage.
That's more than I would have expected.
Yeah. But it's the same thing. Like, if I was there and that was one of the, like, tentpole artists that I had paid my Saturday ticket to see at Lollapalooza, and he walks off stage, maybe I'm excited because I'm like, hey, I just saw Liam Gallagher pitch a fit and walk out. That's cool. That's what I paid for. But that's kind of a bummer. And then some great birthdays, right?
Yeah, definitely. The big heavy hitter this week. So July 19th, 1947, Brian May, guitarist and singer-songwriter. Everyone knows him from Queen, of course. Also an astrophysicist.
So crazy.
his day job. Actually, or would the astrophysicist be his side gig at that point? I feel like if you're the guitar player for Queen, then being the astrophysicist is kind of your hobby.
Like a hobby?
Yeah, exactly. But July 20th, 1945, John Lodge. You've heard me talk about the Moody Blues quite a bit, bass and vocalist for the Moody Blues. Also July 20th in 1947, Carlos Santana, which everyone should know, Mexican-American rock guitarist, and has been, he's another one of those that is looking like he's going to have a 50-plus year career. And he's getting up there, man. He's an old dude, and he's still playing. July 20th, 1964, Chris Cornell, who also doesn't need any explanation. And again on July 20th, 1966, Stone Gossard, guitar player for Pearl Jam, which is interesting because they were kind of friends.
Mother Love
sister
Bone.
bands.
Yeah, they were in.
Did a lot of work together. July 21st, 1948, we have Cat Stevens, at least as he's known musically. Changed his name years later after converting to Islam, but
Yusuf
we know
Islam,
him.
I think.
Yusuf Islam. July 22nd, 1941. Oh my God, 1941. American singer, songwriter, band leader, record producer, the master of funk himself, George Clinton.
That make him 80? Ooh, jeez, man.
And he is funky as ever. I just brought him up recently because my kids were listening to the Trolls World Tour soundtrack, and there's a version of Atomic Dog on there, and it is just so good. And that's a great soundtrack. But so as kids movie soundtracks go, that's really up there for me. But George Clinton, Parliament,
he's the man.
Like, you can't get. How much cooler could you get than George Clinton?
He's a weird cat, man. Yeah.
I can't think of anybody cooler.
Yeah. So again, we'll touch on this on side B, but my favorite OutKast album is Aquemini, and there's a song on there called Synthesizer that features George Clinton, and that song is so weird and it is so cool, and you can see the influence there, man. I mean, the Mothership definitely picked up Andre 3000 at some point,
Yeah. Everything he touches turns to funky gold. It's just amazing.
For real.
And then we've got July 22nd, 1947, Don Henley, singer, songwriter, and drummer for the Eagles. One of a short list of frontline singer drummers.
Yeah.
So he deserves props for that, if nothing else. But prolific songwriter, obviously. And then July 23rd, 1965, Slash himself, guitarist with Guns N' Roses and other projects later on. I'm actually a pretty big Velvet Revolver fan. I know that was kind of a short-lived project, but come on.
Scott
Velvet
Weiland,
Revolver
right?
that was amazing. That was talk about I don't know if you can call it a super group, but that was a great collaboration. That was fantastic.
especially because you didn't think, and I'm still in shock that Guns N' Roses would ever reunite and you'd ever hear that music again or hear new Guns N' Roses music or anything. And then you get that, the audio slave to the Guns N' Roses, right? You legitimately get Scott Weiland, iconic frontman from that era heading up this. It was fantastic.
Yeah, the original audio
it was
slave.
So cool. Yeah.
And then certainly last but not least, July 23rd, 1971, Alison Krauss, bluegrass country singer, songwriter, fiddle player, amazing, talented musician. And we are happy to have her. So that's this week's birthdays. And, we came off of talking about George Clinton and his work with OutKast. I see, unfortunately, our listeners can't see you rocking the OutKast hoodie.
That's right.
Very jealous of that. And so we are coming up on the release of this ATLiens 25-year anniversary. And I really want to dig into this. It's an area of music that I'm not super well versed in, but the artists that I do know, I absolutely love. So I'm excited to flip it over and start talking about this alternative hip hop from the ATL. Can we do that?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Sounds good. We are back on side B of this episode of Retro Groove, and we are about to dive deep in the deep south and dig up some incredible music that
the
dirty south. And it's so interesting to me how, you have this East Coast, West Coast thing that was so, seemed like that's all it was, at least if you were, a suburban white kid like you or me. That's kind of what we knew from the media that we had access to. This was pre-internet, and all we heard was East Coast versus West Coast. But there was something brewing down south.
Oh yeah,
wasn't there?
There was, and so I was thinking about how I kind of first was exposed to OutKast, and it's again, no internet. It was music videos and stuff on MTV. I don't know. Do you have any memories of when you first heard their music or saw them?
Well, my first exposure was getting slapped in the face with the Bombs Over Baghdad video, which is, first of all, it's a bonkers music video in the best possible way, but just, I had never heard anything like it because it's a rap song. It's from a hip hop group, but it's got like ripping guitar solo and this fast, almost rock beat, with just all the crazy, trap rhythms going on, but just kind of sped up. Never heard anybody who sounded like Andre 3000 before. And it was like, what is this? And I remember listening to a friend of mine's sister had the record, and all they would do was play Miss Jackson over and over again. I remember kind of popping it on when she wasn't around, and then Gasoline Dreams come on, and I'm like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
This is so cool.
That album's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that Miss Jackson was my first. As were probably most people. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Like, it was interesting. I asked my wife as we were kind of talking about this, earlier. I asked her what her kind of first experience was, and she said it was Hey Ya, which I was like, that's kind of weird. I mean, look, I mean, Hey Ya, look, it's probably one of the best pop songs of our generation. Like,
that also kind of makes sense because that was like their top 40 crossover, if you want to call it that.
Right. Except that she's wrong because because then I said Miss Jackson and she was like, oh yeah, wait, was that before Hey Ya? And I'm like, yeah, that was definitely before Hey Ya. And I was like, how about So Fresh and So Clean? And she's like, oh my God, yeah. So I definitely also, to backpedal and give her a little credit, like I heard Miss Jackson. I loved Miss Jackson. I was so interested in what was going on there. But I also had a friend, she like loved this song. We didn't know the words to this song. It was So Fresh and So Clean, but like we had no idea what they were actually saying. I didn't know that was OutKast because if you hear it on the radio, nothing says what it is unless you catch a DJ talking about it. So I didn't know that the two songs were from the same artist for a while. And I remember going into a store that we used to have here called Nobody Beats the Wiz, and they'd have that wall of like the cool music right now that was up, and seeing Stankonia and grabbing it and looking at the back and being like, that's the same band. This is both of them. And again, I putting that on, there's so many great songs on that album, but when you get to B.O.B., it is like, it really kicks you in the head.
Oh my God.
That song is such a jam.
I played it in the car today and I had it up so loud and I was like, it makes you want to just go nuts and dance in the worst. Like I can't, it makes you want to dance like they dance in the music video. Yeah. And it's like, my body doesn't do that. It's like I would pull something and need a industrial size bottle of
Bob, you hit rag. Yeah, it's so good, man.
It's awesome.
So let's go back a little bit because that's obviously pretty far down the line for them. You set the scene of 94, 95. Their first album comes out. Southern Playlist of Cadillac Music. Awesome album, definitely kind of the departure from, like you said, the East Coast, West Coast gangster. It was still hood. It was still like street rap influence. You could see it was gritty, but for me, and again, I think that this is like a thread through a lot of things that I've talked about, is that I tend to like the later produced version of most artists as opposed to their earlier stuff. That it's really just grungy and raw. This one, it's a classic, man. It's fantastic. Aquemini is my album. That's their third. I adore that album. Yeah. But the first one is there was nothing else like it. Right. And so when you think back to East Coast was Bad Boy, it was Biggie and Diddy. West Coast was Suge Knight with Death Row, and you had Snoop and Dre and Tupac.
And everybody was so serious about everything.
Oh, everybody was so freaking serious, man. And it was real deal gangster
everything
stuff.
Was life or death, which I get it. When you're living in that environment, that's your day-to-day life.
Right. And honestly, that's hip hop was born in New York, and New York had its claim on it. But the West Coast side, I mentioned those artists. Look, I love Biggie, but Snoop, Dr. Biggie. Dre, and Tupac. That's insane. That's like that was so there was such a movement on the West Coast, and New York is defending itself. And everything from the South, and I don't want to kind of dismiss anything, because there was stuff before OutKast, right? Arrested Development was fantastic hip hop group, very like aware, positive, Afrocentric, and they won 2 Grammys in '93. You know, best new artist, best rap performance by a group. So Southern rap existed. You had Crisscross, you know, like whatever, what you say, what you will about them. Again, not my group, but like they broke through.
Definitely broke through. Mm-hmm.
Jermaine Dupri produced them at the age of like 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And sees the success and how he's not able to kind of control it. And so goes on to create his own label then later on in 93. And he starts producing records. Like, again, he's 21, 22, producing Jagged Edge and Escape. Like, it just insane. But what you really had, like, when people thought of the South, they thought of Miami bass, they thought of this dirty rap, they thought of what we would probably all dismissively say, and rightfully so I guess, as jock jams now. You would think of Whoop, There It Is by Tag Team, who I think actually might have been from Atlanta. I'm not sure. Quad City DJs, Come On Ride the Train, 69 Boys with Tootsie Roll. Like, you had these kind of booty shaking dance rap songs that came out of Miami, and that was like what was viewed as the South. So we go to the Source Awards in 95, and it's Best New Artist, and you've got, I think it's Bone Thugs and Harmony and Smith and Wesson. I mean, it's real East Coast versus West Coast stuff.
Yeah.
And but OutKast is up, and you know, Southern Playlist at Cadillac Music was huge. It was this breakthrough album, and they win it, you know, and they get booed on the stage. Like, they walk up onto the stage. Again, you go back to that kind of tension that we're talking about that existed in hip hop at that time, where you've got Suge Knight and you've got Diddy and Biggie all in this room, all kind of rooting for their coast. And they announce OutKast, and the room is silent. You go watch the video. It's incredible. Like, they walk up on stage, and Andre has got, you know, he feels it, and it's a short little speech, and he's just like, he ends it by saying, the South got something to say. You know, he says, you know, they, like, I'm tired of being ignored and dismissed and whatever. The South has got something.
Outcast.
South's got something to say. And so, again, that's kind of why I think this conversation is interesting to frame it as alt and ATL, because they really were doing something different. And it was not embraced by the community wholly at the time. Now, again, granted, they won the award. Like, it was being embraced by some people. People saw that it was a movement, but by the culture, at least in that room, and the predominant gangster culture of hip hop at the time, not so much. So then they go back and make the album that we're talking about right now. They make ATLiens, and it's you can feel the progression. You know, like their personas start to develop. They've got this otherworldly, psychedelic, funk, alien kind of comic book vibe. They're becoming larger than life. Andre becomes a vegan, and he stops cutting his hair and like starts wearing these clothes. And I think that empowered them. You know, it feels like it kind of gave them this boost that they needed to say, like, here's your validation, but also you can prove yourself. And then they got their paycheck too. You know, like, it was a huge album. You know, so we'll touch on LaFace a little bit. Like, L.A. Reid and Babyface, you know, two massive names in the music industry, especially now. But back then, Babyface had produced some incredible artists, you know, TLC and whatnot.
That was their first big, like, breakthrough artist, right? LaFace?
TLC was, yeah. TLC was their first like claim to fame. And then you'd have Tony Braxton and Usher. I mean, for like a 10-year run, LaFace Records was just
unstoppable.
They owned that whole world.
I know some of this stuff.
Yeah. So ATLiens, fantastic album. And you start seeing them, like, again, the growth is there. They're on Goody Mob albums. Goody Mob is on some of their albums. They formed the Dungeon family. I mean, that's how they all kind of started. So the Dungeon family started as this like 3-man production crew. Dungeon was their recording studio,
right?
And yeah, would go on to those guys would go on to produce, TLC records and whatnot as well.
And you know who else is featured on ATLiens? Killer Mike.
Killer Mike's on ATLiens. Killer Mike is also on The Whole World, which is one of those situations they put out a greatest hits and then throw on like a one-off track, like a single that's has never been released before or whatever. And he's on that and is fantastic. Yeah, another killer, pun intended, rep from Atlanta for sure.
Well, I had to throw that in there because I'm a massive RTJ fan, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
For sure, yeah. And it's interesting because, Killer Mike is basically part of the second generation of the Dungeon family. He kind of carries the torch after that that kind of ends its run. Mm-hmm. So ATLiens, admittedly, like, was never my album. I think it's fantastic. I liked where they went next. I think it was the step in the direction where you can hear it. There's a song on there called Jazzy Belle that it's the beginning of Miss Jackson. Like, you can hear what will then later on be Miss Jackson.
Exactly. I was just thinking that when I was listening to it in the car today. That's exactly what that song sounds like.
Yeah, it feels like it. There's another song called Wheels of Steel on there that's just so dope. But yeah, there's great tunes on that album. But it's got this gospel, psych, funk infusion that just didn't exist anywhere else. And then they go on to, like we talked about, Aquemini. I mean, Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks is on Aquemini, right? Because that
Rosa
was
Parks. Yeah,
I feel
Rosa
like that
Parks
was kind of
their
their first,
like, pop. Like,
their first kind of radio hit.
Yeah, Elevators, You and Me was an urban, like a hip hop radio hit to some extent, but Rosa Parks was a banger. Rosa Parks was a breakthrough, like, radio hit for those guys for sure. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you're seeing this kind of cohesion between the weird aesthetics and the funky sounds and the dynamic between the two guys, and it's manifesting with a pop sensibility. And there's another moment on the album. And again, these guys, like, the Source thing is a unique situation. When you look back at New York hip hop, you had a bunch of others at play. I mean, like, you started off with A Tribe Called Quest and Public Enemy, and A Tribe Called Quest were huge influences for OutKast. Yeah. But then you had Wu-Tang. And OutKast had performed with Wu-Tang. It wasn't like they were ostracized or anything. So it was there was acceptance there. But there's a moment on Aquemini where Ghostface Killah is featured on a track, and Ghostface is fantastic. Yeah. I love Method Man. RZA's fantastic. Like, he's, RZA the Razor, but I think that Ghostface was always that unique sound. When you go and listen to
his
Goody
solo
Mob,
stuff is great.
Yeah, his solo stuff is fantastic. You go and listen to Goody Mob, and all of those guys are super talented. And there's definitely, they're kind of like a Southern Wu-Tang until you hear CeeLo cut in, and CeeLo's got that distinctive flow and voice and singing. I do love the hip hop groups when you start to kind of hear their voices and appreciate their flows and like how dynamic that they can be. But anyway, so Ghostface is on this album, and he's kind of there's a one-off piece where he's kind of talking about, you know, like cutting it up and let's melt faces and everything. And it feels like there's this kind of cohesion that's happening, that everything's kind of coming together. And yeah, so Aquemini fantastic. That's my album that I went back to after Stankonia and fell in love with this band.
Yeah.
And then, you know, The Love Below comes out, and I remember seeing them. I remember seeing the Hey Ya music video and being blown away that this is the same group. Like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. And the other singles, like The Way You Move, felt like an OutKast song. Like that was like I got it. And even Roses, like that was the third single off of there, and that felt like an OutKast song in many ways too. But Hey, just like couldn't really see it coming at the time, but now as I've kind of gone back and thought about it and looked back over and listened to some of these albums over again recently, you could see the progression. You could really see that from Aquemini's pop sensibility to Stankonia, where there's just they've got a handle on it. They know how to write these catchy songs, and they're killing it. And then obviously then it's like they put the ball on the tee, they built the tee, they got everything set up, and then it was just like, this thing's going out of the park, man. Yeah. And then it's weird because they do this film and score, like an album companion to a film that doesn't go over super great. I mean, I haven't admittedly spent a ton of time with Idlewild. They kind of just, I think they hit it, you know, like they hit what they were going to do. And I have a lot of respect for that. I've had this conversation, very different conversation as it pertains to Billy Joel, who I didn't think would come up in this dialogue, but same kind of thing where he just did his thing. He wrote his hits. He made what he was going to make. And now he's gone off and done other stuff. And, you know, he'll play Madison Square Garden and he'll play the hits for everybody. And OutKast had a fantastic reunion run. That's where I got this hoodie. And hopefully they do another at some point. But I think that they both kind of realized that we don't need to make anything as a unit anymore. The catalog and what it is exists this way, and Andre has gone off to producing and writing and acting and screenwriting, and Big Boy's had his solo career, and he did a thing with Fantagram.
Yes,
Big Grams, that's what it was. I was trying to remember it, which was dope. Yeah,
very dope.
He's popped up in a bunch of places, and again, Goody Mob. You know, they had a couple albums. Again, like if you like Wu-Tang, but you want it to be a little less, you know, gangbanging and in your face, and a little more of like, you know, mindfulness and, you know, gospel influenced, but also like rough and tough and really like solid chops. And then you see where CeeLo goes. I mean, like, it's crazy to think that there are going to be tons of people who know CeeLo. I mean, there was a whole generation that just knew him from the Gnarls Barkley song, and then some from FU. Like, he just has this huge pop hit, like that you wouldn't think would be a pop hit, but it was a jam.
It was everywhere.
But then when you listen to Goody Mob, he's rapping, and he's you know, he's singing on later records, but on the early ones on Soul Food, he's rapping, and he can cut it up.
Yeah.
And so Atlanta then goes on to break through into mainstream hip hop and R&B like nobody's business. I mean, Bad Boy signed 112, I think in 95, 96. So right around that time, they recognized what was going on down there, at least on the R&B scene.
Yeah.
You have Lil Jon, you have Ludacris, you have T.I., you have Childish Gambino, 2 Chainz, Migos. I mean, it's Future. Like, Atlanta has become, now for 25 years, 26 years, has been the third city, if you will. You can make the argument for Chicago. I have a love-hate relationship with Kanye West.
Yeah.
I do love Common, but Chicago really didn't plant itself on the map until Kanye started producing records from those people. You have Detroit, Eminem and whatnot, but Anderson .Paak. There's so many great alt artists that come out now, and there's no other city that does it outside of New York or LA, other than Georgia, other than Atlanta.
Yeah.
So you touched on Run the Jewels, and
yes.
They're not really retro, I guess, but like. We should definitely talk for a minute about them. I mean, LP New York, Killer Mike Atlanta, and just you're talking about OutKast, one of the greatest hip hop duos of all time, and Run the Jewels right up there, man. I think like poised to be one of the greatest hip hop collabs and hip hop groups of all time as well.
There doesn't seem to be a lot of duos either. You've got, the larger groups, 3+, and you've
Public
got
Enemy,
solo artists.
Yeah.
But man, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of the hip hop duos.
Yeah, it was Chuck D and Flavor Flav.
Eric B and Rakim.
Yeah, Eric B and Rakim, yeah.
But and then OutKast, and there's just something that for some reason I really enjoy the duo. How they'll play off of each other. And then when you've got like a third artist as a feature, it just works. So it's almost like a podcast. Like you've got the two, normal, hosts usually, and then you'll have a guest come in every once in a while. So I don't know. It just feels really, really right. And that marriage of LP and Killer Mike, LP's production is bonkers. And I think that is kind of a theme of the Southern hip hop, the Atlanta hip hop scene, is that, even going back and listening to those early OutKast records, the production was very unique. A lot more instrumentation. I think just being in the Bible Belt, you've got that gospel influence as well, because a lot of these folks, where did they learn how to play music and sing? They learned it in church. And so that is a huge, part of the aesthetic there. And so when LP comes in with this insane, like, at least early on, almost off-putting production style where it's so in your face and sounds so crazy. And I love every bit of it. I love his solo stuff. But for some reason, when him and Killer Mike got together, it was just like, it's just so much greater than the sum of its parts, which is saying a lot, because individually they're amazing.
Yeah, they were great.
You get this group, and honestly, they've become easily in my top 3 favorite hip hop artists of all time.
Yeah, they're also a unique thing for me, where when I think of what my favorite albums are by an artist, usually it's, the first, the second, the third, something like that, and then a later or an earlier album to follow. And it's so far, fingers crossed, consistently, the newest album is my favorite. Getting better. And the last album is the one, every single album has built upon it. And look, Big Boy's on the first album. I think it's Banana Clipper. Like that album has some bangers on it.
Absolutely.
RTJ2 blew my goddamn mind.
Yeah, as it did everyone.
And talked about Rage on side A, like, all of a sudden Zach De La Roja shows up. He can't be on a Rage Against the Machine album, but he's on a Run the Jewels cut, you know, like, and killing it. Like, all of a sudden you're reminded of what kind of an MC that guy can be. And yeah, I mean, RTJ3, I had to get a second copy because like I listened to the CD too much and it got scuffed up and it wouldn't play anymore. And then RTJ4 has been, I mean, it felt like forever waiting for it. It was probably 3 years. I don't even know, but like
I felt like it was so short. I felt like it was such a short time between 3 and 4, but
I was hungry for it. I don't know. I think for me, it felt really long. For me, I was just like, so when are we getting 4? You know, where's the 4th one? And now I'm like, is there going to be a 5th one? What are we going to do, guys?
Well, there's going to be eventually, but my goodness.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah. I got to say, I saw them open up for Lord, which is like, I remember I had to like check twice or 3 times to be like, am I looking at this billing wrong?
Right.
Like, what is
That's
this
a weird
show?
pairing.
It was at like an arena. It was, you know, like a sports arena. And I got us like nice seats. You know, my wife is I like Lord a lot, but my wife's a big Lord fan. And I was like, we're going to get there for Run the Jewels though. Like we're going to go there for Run the Jewels and we'll stay for Lord.
Yeah. I would have stayed for Lord, but I would have been there for Run the Jewels.
100%. Yeah. And so I got us, it was like a birthday present or something. So I got us like nice tickets or whatever. And, I remember getting there and bopping. You know, I had a great time watching them. And then, dude, like the rows right in front of us after Run the Jewels were done opened up. Like a bunch of seats opened up. And I was waiting for them to come back, and we got to like the 3rd or 4th song in Lord's set, and they hadn't filled back in. It was one of the few times, I do not do this at events, but I was just like, let's just move up, you know? Yeah. And as we're doing that, I'm thinking to myself, who paid, you know, like these seats, unless they got them for free from something or other, like who paid over $100 or whatever it was for these seats to see Run the Jewels perform for 30 minutes? Like, I love that. I love them. But like, that's a crazy thing to be like, I'm going to spend a ton of money to go see Run the Jewels do an 8-song set, you know, opening up for Lord, and not stick around and get my money's worth out of this thing. But we moved up a couple rows and had a great time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
That's really, really cool.
So the last thing I kind of want to touch, I mean, so we're talking about alt hip hop. I discovered MF Doom late. I discovered him with the album he did with Danger Mouse. And I wasn't even that big into the Adult Swim, like Aqua Teen Hunger Force or whatever it was. So like the references on that didn't click with me. Like I was aware of it, but it wasn't something I was a fan of. Right. I just remember the production, you know, obviously was becoming familiar with who Danger Mouse was at the time. The production from song to song was bonkers. And this guy is just prolific. Yeah. Like just an incredible MC. One of the best that I think I've ever heard.
Yeah, he's just lyrically on a completely different playing field.
Insane, dude. Like, holy crap. And so I admittedly, like, I feel like I still have a ton of his catalog to dive into. I know songs kind of cherry picked here and there. Yeah. Because of his like odd persona, and he would release things under different names. Like he's not the easiest person to just have again, Run the Jewels. It's just 1, 2, 3, and 4. Like it's just like, and then you can go to their solo stuff. Like he's kind of all over the place, so it's harder to track. But he's one. We talk about duos, and it was kind of a one-off project. But Mos Def and Talib Kweli had a one-off thing in the mid 2000s called Black Star. That's worth checking out. Like that was really cool. And again, those two guys have kind of paved their own ways in how they kind of approach hip hop. Mos Def has showed up kind of like De La Soul on those Gorillaz albums a bunch. Damon Albarn always looking for really cool artists to pull onto his collabs. I get exposed to like I think like PopCon and like a bunch of different random like reggaeton and hip hop artists through Damon Albarn stuff.
Yeah, and if we're going there, we should at least mention Del the funky Homo sapien, who,
for sure.
When he kind of came a little bit in the spotlight with that first Gorillaz album, he put out, I bought Deltron 3030 when it came out, because I was like, this is a very unique rapper with a unique flow that also kind of has that, just the insane vocabulary and the use of language and the use of words that you're just like, it just, every verse blows your mind.
Yeah, just distinctive sound for sure. Yeah. And then the other thing that I'll touch on is, so it's probably like 2007, 2008, there was a run of records that Epitaph, who obviously, like, I was into Epitaph releases from the punk side of things, and they had put out an album by POS and another album by Atmosphere, although it might have just been a distribution thing. But I remember like seeing Epitaph news and releases, and these artists were on there. There was a guy named Sage Francis. There's this whole alt hip hop movement in the mid to late 2000s that Epitaph kind of capitalized on. And I found out, just doing a little research, that I was familiar with Rhyme Sayers. Like, it took me to this label in Minnesota called Rhyme Sayers that was founded by Atmosphere, and it's got artists like Evidence and A$AP Rock on it. But like, I was exposed because they signed a distribution deal with Epitaph to get their records out there, basically. And again, like, when you hear hip hop and it doesn't sound like the crunk, it doesn't sound like the gangster stuff, it doesn't sound like bling, like, Cash Money is Cash Money. Like, there's appeal to all of it.
Right.
It's just, I do like the kind of sensibility of being mindful, positive leaning, real talk, like, not just flashing stuff around and talking about who you're going to shoot tomorrow. Like, it's just not what vibes with me.
Right.
And so you have this really intelligent kind of elevated perspective of hip hop that I got exposed to around then. And it just kind of, you could feel it like pivot what I understood that this form of music could be. You said you're a fan of A$AP Rock, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his, and I kind of just discovered him relatively recently. I mean, I remember hearing one of his earlier albums when I was, working at a record store fresh out of college. But again, going back to the really interesting use of language and every line having something in, you could listen to the song 13 times and the 14th time you hear something, you catch something new that he's saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, sweet. Well, I mean, I think, look, there's so many different directions you could go in when you're talking about the word alt, just like the word indie, means so much and is so broad that you could take this in a ton of different directions. I think this is probably a good place to stop. But I mean, you look at what OutKast has been able to do and what the impact that they have. I think it was 6 Grammys altogether.
Oh, wow.
Just like they changed hip hop and LaFace changed R&B and hip hop forever.
Yep.
And gave it this kind of dynamic angle beyond what it had already been. And look, 2 white dudes talking about this stuff. like we got pulled into it, though. We both got sucked into it.
Absolutely.
And I think it says a lot for how this music can kind of break down any kind of barriers and entice and speak to different people with different mindsets who can find this appreciation for it.
Well, groups like OutKast and Run the Jewels and artists like A$AP Rock and Doom, I'm not a person who is a fan of a particular genre. I'm pretty genreless, but I like music that I have some kind of connection with that makes me feel something. And if we're talking about like, yeah, of course, I love Snoop, I love Biggie, but if we're talking about East Coast, West Coast, the stuff that ended up connecting with me that I had an emotional response to was stuff like OutKast, was Run the Jewels, like that makes me feel something, you know what I mean? And that's what I'm looking for, not necessarily a particular sound or just a particular aesthetic.
Yeah.
So Liam, I want to actually thank you for educating me today on a lot of this stuff. You've introduced me to some artists that I'm definitely going to get to go down the rabbit trail on, which is always super exciting as a music fan. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, no problem. I mean, again, like this is stuff that I have enjoyed for a while, know some, and I'm still learning about. I think that in all of our conversations, we have a bunch of knowledge and a lot of either opinions or interests, and probably I'm sure that there are a ton of things that we missed or may have gotten certain facts a little off or whatever. But there's nothing but love and appreciation for this group, for all the groups that we talked about today, and 100%. For this music and how it's kind of impacted both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly has impacted just the culture at large. And it'll be exciting to see what happens in the future. Mm-hmm. But this was great. Thanks so much, Liam.
Of course.
All right. And hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks so much for listening to Retro Groove. We are part of the RetroLogic Network. Check out the website retrologic.games for social links, merch, community, and more. Adios.
Ain't no thing but a chicken wing.